Hello, welcome to Sabbath Cafe Podcast, where we talk about finding peace in everyday life. This is Michelle, and you're listening to Podcast 6. And in this podcast, I'll be talking about my experience last year in learning to replace anxiety with peace. This week is the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States, and I just wanted to take this chance to thank you. Thank you for those listening to the podcast. Thank you for those reading my blog post. I really put them together, not thinking and not knowing if anyone would listen or read or even be encouraged by them. So people listening and reading, I just want to say thank you. Seeing your reactions really encouraged me. So thank you for being there on the other end. And so without further delay, here's Podcast 6. So I was looking through my journal recently and just kind of looking through what are the things that I've been learning and what are the things that I've been wrestling with. I realized suddenly that I have been learning to stay in rest and learning to replace my anxiety with peace for about a year now. And why it hit me so hard was that this actually started as a program by one of the pastors that I listened to online. And he intended it to be a 10-day rest immersion. So really the whole program, he gives you this program for 10 days and it's packed with information. And of course for me, I decided I'm going to take it at my own pace. So I took it and I learned from it and I was just taking my time going through the program. And I'm still I think in the first few lessons. And before you knew it, it's been a year since I've been practicing to replace my anxiety with peace and rest. So in today's program, so I'm going to talk about a little bit what I learned in my time this past year. To give a little background, I grew up in a family where actually a lot of people in my family tend to get stressed very easily. Now that I'm a little older, I see some of similar emotional patterns in my immediate family. And so I never really thought that anxiety was a bad thing or something that I could live without. As I started my spiritual journey, honestly, I see a lot of the people around me, even in ministry or in my church family, where stress and anxiety just seems to be part of the normal routine. In my personal life, God's been, I guess, speaking to me a lot about peace. Whenever I come across scriptures about peace, about rest, my light bulb just goes on. And so personally, I seem to respond to that. There's a longing in my heart to have a lifestyle of peace rather than this constant gnawing feeling of fear or worry that constantly comes up, regardless of circumstances. I think I mentioned before or often in my programs that it's not about circumstances when it comes to anxiety for me, because God could fix one thing and the next day I would find something else. I'll move down the list and find something else to be obsessed about. And I noticed that pattern in my life. And so when I came across this program, this rest immersion program that talked about this possibility of living a life of peace rather than a lifestyle of stress and anxiety, I just immediately went, wow, is that a possibility? Can that really happen for me? And, of course, it was presented as a 10-day program. So I thought, what do I have to lose? 10 days, I can do that. And so I signed on and a year later, here we are today. I've learned quite a lot and I've changed quite a lot. I think the first thing that I've noticed that I've changed is I no longer accept anxiety or a state of anxiety or stress as a normal routine in my life anymore. It doesn't mean that I don't feel anxious, I don't feel stressed, In fact, this season, like right now, I have a lot of stuff going on in my life that it does not seem to be resolved. In this season, there are a lot of problems that's happening in my everyday life that cannot be resolved overnight. They're just long-term issues, and we just have to wait for things to get resolved. We have to wait for the contractors to come out and fix a leak in my bathtub and things like that. So my circumstances are still filled with the everyday challenges. Things that would have stressed me out before are still there. But I think how I've changed is how I face them. One of the first things that the program taught us to do was that instead of responding to these trigger points in anxiety or fear, as soon as I recognize that I'm stressed out about something, I immediately take that stress point and I start to pray. I start to surrender that to God, and I ask God to give me peace in that situation. And I invite Jesus, the Prince of Peace, into that situation with me. I challenge myself to choose to stand with God in peace instead of choosing to stay in my anxiety and fear. And that sounds very simple and superficial almost, because I'm just saying a prayer. But to me, it was also a way to change the way I think. And so oftentimes it gave me a point to hang on to. And little did you know that really simple prayer changed the way I reacted in stress. It changed the way I responded to these crises in my life. And actually, every time I sense fear or worry, or I feel helpless, I just kind of go to that prayer and I just center myself and I just invite God into the situation with me. Every time I prayed that prayer, I would sense his peace. I can see a glimpse, I can feel a glimpse of peace. And then I have a choice. I can choose at that point, I have access to God's peace, or I could go back to my point of stress. And repeatedly over time, I'm able to choose to remain in that peace longer and longer. And now looking back over a year, many of these trigger situations of these anxiety, I can't even remember what they were anymore. But I knew it happened a lot. They somehow all were able to resolve themselves. And I had learned to remain in peace now more and more through all of those things. So that was the first thing that I'm so grateful for looking back, is that I am much better at not reacting to situations in fear and anxiety anymore. It's easier for me to choose and to experience God's peace, to access God's peace that's always been there for me. But now it's easier for me to access it because I've been practicing it for a year now. And that kind of leads me to the second thing I learned is it takes time to change an emotional habit. It takes time to change my reaction, my habitual reaction in fear and anxiety. And through this experience, God's also opened my eyes to see, where did I learn all these responses from? I realized there's a lot of people surrounding my life that they responded to every little thing in anxiety and fear. Now, we can throw in all these assumptions on why that came about, but let me tell you, it doesn't matter how it came about. We have a way out of it. And so I see actually a pattern of anxiety in one side of my family. Not going to say which side, but I do see it. That there's one side of the family where many of my relatives tend to respond into situations in anxiety. And it's almost kind of like a traumatic response. And I don't know where that came from, but I do recognize it. And through this last year, gosh, it's kind of been showing me it's okay. I'm going to walk you out of that. one step at a time, one prayer at a time. And it does take time. So if you are in a situation also where you are learning new patterns of behavior, learning new emotional responses, whether it's through counseling or just through a friend or whichever channel you're going through, just know that it takes time. And for me, it's been a lifetime of anxiety. It's been a lifetime of embracing fear and anxiety, and it's not going to go away overnight. In fact, I'm amazed that I'm even able to have such breakthrough in such a short amount of time in a year. I'm not like the most faithful person at all. I'm not the most disciplined person at all. But all I did was every time I felt anxiety and I don't know what to do, I would turn to my prayer that I had written down and I would just pray it. And I would basically start a new habit of peace, start a new habit of inviting God into my life and partnering with me. And that has been just an amazing thing. It really has changed my life a lot. So I want to just encourage those of you out there that seem to be wrestling with an anxiety that will not go away, that seem to be enslaved to fear, because that's how I felt, fear of whatever it is that will not go away. There is light at the end of your tunnel. So don't worry, just continue to engage in the new habits that God's given to you. Keep at it. Your emotional habits can change. Your emotional reactions can change. So that's the second thing I've learned, is that it takes time to change my emotional responses, but it does change. And the third thing I want to remind everyone is you will face opposition. You will face resistance. I think that happens anytime we try to change a behavior or a pattern. I have to be honest, I never realized how much of my everyday routine is an open door to anxiety and triggers. And I'm not just talking about challenging circumstances. I'm talking about my social media feeds. I'm talking about my news, even the commercials on TV. So often that as I'm trying to remain in that peace and keep my focus, I'll see news or I'll see something that triggers a thought and boom, and next thing you know, I crash right back in. And so I had to really be careful to watch out for these things in my daily routine, the informations I'm receiving, even the people that I talk to, some of my friends and Facebook posts. And I have to, I've muted some of the channels that just so that I can continue to be focused. It's unfortunate, but I think that's just part of the journey, is that you recognize that there are going to be areas where you will face resistance, and that you're going to have negativity come in that will trigger anxiety or fear, and that will challenge you in your path to recovery. And you're just going to have to shut it down, shut it off. And later on, when you feel more comfortable, you can, look at it again, and it's not going to impact you. But as I look back at my year, I recognize that there are people that God gave me permission to just take a break from. And I realized as soon as I took a break from these relationships, I was able to really make progress in learning to rest in peace and learning to not give in to my fears, not give in to these thought patterns that led me down to the wrong path. So if you are facing resistance, just be smart about them. Recognize that you might need to make some changes. Go ahead and do what you need to do. I've been very grateful as I just kind of looked back and realized how much I've learned and changed in this last year through the simple program and from this teacher. But I also realized that God started teaching me about His peace a long time ago. In fact, I think I started with just looking through scripture about peace, about rest, and I just started to look through it and I journaled in response to it. And so if you're also feeling like you're tired of living in a life of anxiety, that you're tired of living in fear all the time, that you want a little bit more of God's peace in your life, there is something very simple that you can do. I'm going to compile a list of scriptures and put it as a PDF, and you can access it in the link of this podcast. And what I like to invite you to do is just to go through the scripture and interact with them, whether it's through journaling or in prayer, and talk to God about things that hit your heart. Talk to God about what you don't understand. Talk to God about your struggles. Also, talk to God about wanting to take a hold of what He gives us. You may be surprised at what you find. And that's all the time we have for today. I'll put the PDF link down below so you can download that for your reference. And I'll also include the link to the program that I was on, the Rest Immersion program. I'm not sure if that's still being offered, but I'll include the link. So if you're curious, you can check that out. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday and have a great week going ahead. We'll see you next time. You have been listening to Sabbath Cafe Podcast. If you enjoyed this, please visit sabbathcafeblog.com for more information. Thank you.